Hello, happy Friday, everybody. Sorry for the 3-minute delay. My husband and I went out on a date, you know, and now the kids are going to bed. So, this live chat is about robbing. First, want to thank our sponsor, Galena Farms, for sponsoring my channel in many ways, including these live chats. Stay tuned. Next month, I'm going to have some free giveaways from two new sponsors as well for people. Sorry, but just United States only, solely because of shipping. If you're interested in connecting with other local beekeepers, I recommend putting in your name and the area you're in into the chat because it's a great way to see where everyone else is from. And of course, feel free to post in the comments when you have questions. If you're watching this at another time, check the comments to see the questions that people are asking. I'll get to them when I have a minute. But first, I'd like to say a little bit about the topic we're going to be talking about. And real fast, this is such a fun time to just like be out gathering seeds and just looking at the environment. I am like almost going crazy with excitement. It's been so long since I've been on the continental US. It's been over a decade, and I really missed the variety of plants and animals that we have here. There's a lot of insects in Hawaii, but there's not a variety of them. And so today alone, I was just trying to find a yellow jacket to take a picture of for the video I'm putting out tomorrow, and I came across like 3 different colored dragonflies, and a giant leaf cutter had made its way into our kitchen somehow. It's a leaf cutter, but it was like this big, and I forget the official name of it, but it's also known as giant leaf cutter. And there's bumblebees and carpenter bees and all these bee mimicking flies, and so many insects to look at, and so many seeds to gather. My daughter, who's 3, is really into helping me gather seeds. So if you are looking to help your bees out more, and you're finding that you're feeding your bees a lot, now's a really good time to start gathering the bee balm and borage seeds and goldenrod and all of those things. Well, goldenrod's not seeding, but I found some 50% off at the plant shop near me to plant for next year. All right, so robbing. I was talking to somebody about robbing today. She had recently gone through it, and I was trying to think about why I haven't gone through it a lot in Hawaii. Robbing is kind of a scary thing as a beekeeper because it's one of those things that you don't really have a lot of control over. And you don't really know when it's going to happen as much as when it comes to when to harvest honey and when to treat for varroa mites. It's one of those things you really just need to keep an eye out for. Honeybees will rob each other and are one of the greatest threats to a honeybee colony is other honeybees. They are ruthless. They are not trying to save the honeybees. They're trying to save themselves. And wasps are also a really big robber. Now, I haven't had a ton of experience with wasps robbing my beehives as far as I'm aware, but my bees were always on other people's properties. There have been very few times in which I had beehives on my property, and it was really just my first 2 years as a beekeeper this year, and off and on in Hawaii, but they were never there for a long period of time. I always had them elsewhere. And I'll talk a little bit later about that and why. But when your bees aren't there for you to see all the time, it's a lot harder to see when robbing is happening. The reason why you don't want your hive robbed is because when robbing happens, resources can be taken from the hive fast. I mean, like you can lose like pounds of honey in less than a day, in hours. I don't know the exact numbers at how fast it can happen. But when I was talking to the owner of the Wi-Fi hive scale I have, he said that people have seen a hive lose 2 to 3 pounds over the course of the afternoon. And that's one of the things that will set off the alarm for them when their hive scale is monitoring their hives, let them know that robbing is happening. And so, and this can be devastating for a hive because you might have already harvested honey, and so this is the honey that this being stolen is the honey that's supposed to be for them for winter. And that's why it's always good practice to just have some honey stored in a refrigerator or freezer that you can give to the bees if needed, in case they don't have enough come wintertime, uh, instead of just harvesting all of the excess. But when robbing happens, the guard bees will try to sting the other bees, kick them out, keep them from getting in the hive. So a lot of bees die, and a lot of varroa mites. And then with the varroa mites come viruses. So you treat your hive in the late spring, probably July, maybe early August, so that your winter bees are healthy. And then, a couple months later, your varroa mite levels have skyrocketed. And part of that can be due to robbing. So we really don't want robbing to happen. In weaker colonies, it can cause the colony to collapse. Like they can really be robbed to the point that there's just so many bees from other hives just taking advantage of them. And the hive can really just there's really nothing left to overwinter. So it's the colonies that are most at risk are the smaller ones. When I say small, I'm talking about like one brood box max. I would probably say more so like 5 frames of brood or less. Um, Colonies that have an excess of honey and just like no bees really keeping an eye on it, or even colonies that have just an excess of frames and comb and bee bread and resources with not a high population. So that could be a hive that was doing well, had a lot of food on it, and then say something happened to the queen or they swarmed and they didn't successfully requeen, or they successfully requeen, but maybe she's not doing so great. And so the hive's population is just like really struggling. And of course, like weak hives, the hive is probably going to also be a small hive, but hives that maybe were doing well in the springtime, but then just kind of stopped late spring, early summer, which is often a sign of nosema, tracheomites, or a hive that just has a lot of viruses. Viruses can be brought on by varroa mites. And so if you wait too long to treat a hive with a high varroa mite level, you might kill the majority of the mites, but before you kill those mites, the viruses that they had spread throughout the hive, and that can weaken the hive considerably. And so that's why you don't want to wait till your hive has a mite count of like 10, 12 to lower your mite levels, because it's like, what's the point in waiting? It's one thing to decide not to treat, but if you are going to treat, do it so that you keep your hive healthy, not wait till it's at that threshold of being overrun with viruses to want to lower your mite levels. So those are the ones that are most at risk, but it's somewhat common to hear beekeepers say that not only did their weak hives get destroyed by robbing, but their strongest hives, or the biggest hives, the hives that have like all this honey on top, and you just say like they didn't harvest it, and they just now are getting robbed because there's just so much food in the hive, and the other bees know it. So I want to talk about what the signs of robbing, and I also want to talk about what to do when your hive is being robbed and ways that we can decrease this. Because in Hawaii, I didn't experience much robbing. I never lost a hive to robbing. I've seen robbing quite a bit. I've seen lots of bees fighting and trying to sting each other. But the reason why I think that in 12 years I didn't see have a hive collapse due to robbing might have partially, well, Italian bees are kind of known for robbing, but I think because I was very much on the defensive when it came to small hive beetles. And because small hive beetles are so, there's just so many in Hawaii. They just multiply very quickly. The hive beetle population is so high there. Um, I was constantly just on guard, making sure that they weren't being overrun by hive beetles. And because of that, it really, I think, also made it difficult for hives to become uh, robbed to really high, to the extent that they would collapse or be incredibly noticeable to a beekeeper that wasn't checking on them more often than once a week. Because there's similar things that you do when dealing with small hive beetles as well as to prevent robbing. So it can be tricky to figure out whether your hive is being robbed. And there's unless your hive is like, being destroyed and on the verge of collapsing, you may never get that official, like, oh yeah, this was definitely robbing. It's just you're going to have to just guess that it's probably robbing and act accordingly. Uh, so when bees rob, they're doing it because there's a lack of food together. And they are then now going to steal from each other. They don't want to rob each other, and it's very dangerous to go to a hive that's not yours, try to sneak in, steal food, and leave. There's a good chance that the guard bees and other bees will try to kill you. So they don't want to do it, but they will if necessary. So robbing is going to happen when, one, there is a lack of food for the bees to gather. It's often late summer, fall, periods of drought, after really rainy periods, which might have caused a lot of the blooms to fall off, or after a hurricane. You're also going to see usually a more aggressive behavior. Now, that's not doesn't mean your hive is being robbed, but often your bees will be cranky when they are being robbed. It's also a sign that the nectar flow has ended with this aggressive behavior. It lasts usually like a week or two, and then the hive starts to acclimate to the decrease and foraging that needs to be done. So you're going to see the more aggressive behavior. You're going to see bees coming into the hive. You're going to see just the main thing is you're going to see a lot of bees coming and going from the hive. And they are not going to be the average coming and going from the hive, or even just like that extra little surge of activity at the entrance, because that can just be a new nectar flow has started. But you are going to see a lot of bees coming and going, and they are not going to be milling around the hive. So having a bottom board that the bees can land on is really helpful. When I made my own equipment, I didn't have this. So you might be saying, like, doesn't everybody? But I didn't. And sometimes people will cut off the landing board that sticks out. It can be a way for water to get into your hive when you have that. I just Since I was making my own equipment, I just put a flat board and drilled a 3/4 inch hole into my boxes. And so this was harder to see. But when you have a normal bottom board with this little landing pad for them, you can often see guard bees looking out at you. You'll see bees walking around. And when you see this, these are bees that are not in a rush. When a bee is robbing, they want to get in and out as fast as possible. So you will see bees not hovering around the entrance as much. You won't see them walking around on the landing board. You're not going to see a lot of guard bees just milling around looking out. You're going to see bees trying to fly straight into the hive. And you're going to see bees zooming out of the hive really fast. You're not going to see so much bees with pollen on their legs doing this. You're going to see bees just going in and out really fast. You're going to hear a much louder and a higher pitched buzzing sound. It's now tomorrow I'm going to put out a video about robbing, and I'm going to have part in that video a recording of bees robbing and one of bees inside the hive combs, so you can compare the two. But there's just this agitated, higher pitch, louder buzzing that happens with this robbing. And these guard bees are going to be literally, you're going to see bees rolling around, trying to sting each other, maybe 2, 3 bees like on top of each other. You might see bees on the lid doing this. And this is bees fighting. So there's a big difference between bees casually hanging out at the landing board or just busy coming and going with a deeper hum to that higher pitched, frantic kind of really fast paced coming and going from the hive entrance. So I know it can be hard to tell when you're there, but this is why it's really important to spend time observing your beehive. I told you so. I've been saying this for months. You really need to spend time outside your hive watching the entrance. And it will make it so much easier to tell that there's a problem when you've been seeing them calm for the last few months, or when you can look at another hive and see that the difference in between the two. Now, you can see a lot of activity in front of a hive because of orientation flights or because of that new nectar flow starting. So it's really important to just see what the guard bees are doing and just sit there for at least like 5 minutes. Put the veil on. Don't sit in front of the entrance so you're blocking it. You don't want to cause a traffic jam, but observe it from the side and just watch them for a while. Because if you should be seeing, if they're robbing, you're going to be seeing bees on top of each other, stinging each other. Lot of really agitated, kind of frantic behavior. You will also see dead bees on the ground. And if you don't already, it's really good practice to clear away the grass or to lay down gravel or do something to make it easy to keep an eye on the ground outside the front entrance. It's also an easy way to see if a hive has been poisoned or there is another issue. Things like K-wing, it's easy to see bees with their wings in that K shape, which is a sign of tracheal mites, when they are on a ground doesn't have tall grass, And I think it also can be better for dealing with small hive beetles and varroa mites when you don't have that tall grass kind of coming up to the hive and up the hive stand and coming up to the entrance. They say that when bees are robbing, when they're leaving the hive, they might look full or like their abdomens are distended. But I think that's one of those things that I don't really know how you're going to be able to tell that when you're looking at the bees. They also say that robbing bees will fly more in a zigzag pattern when getting to the hive as opposed to in a straight line, like they know where they're going. You might also, but when they get to the entrance, they go right in. They don't land on the landing board and mill around. They might zigzag around trying to figure out where to go and then they go straight in once they figured it out. You might also see bees hanging out, like if you have gaps in your equipment or little cracks where the boxes meet, and you see bees hanging out there, then that's also another time when bees are trying to figure out how to sneak into the hive. Um, if you have a feed in your hive and you have like that amino boost or something, that can have smells that attract robbers. And so these bees smell this stuff, but they don't know how to get in without getting stung. So they're like hanging out around the hive trying to figure out how to get inside. Um, so if you do have a hive scale, seeing a dramatic decrease in weight over a short period of time is also another sign that your hive is being robbed. Your hive's weight will decrease during the day as a lot of the foragers leave. But if you're seeing, like a 2 pound decrease, or you're seeing from one day to the next that the hive is decreasing quite a bit, then that is a sign that it is being robbed. Another really big sign your hive is being robbed is that you'll see little bits, flakes, and pieces of beeswax on your landing board. And they say, I've never noticed this before, but that when bees rob, they will like kind of wipe their sticky feet onto the outside of the hive boxes before they fly off. And so you might see little specks by the entrance. Not specks that look like bee poop, like those little orangey yellow splatters, but like two little specks, like from their legs. So next I'm going to talk about what to do when you think your hive is being robbed. I just wanted to check the comments. I saw that Jean says, how many hives am I running stateside? Right now, I have 4. I bought 3 and split 1. So now we have 4. I don't plan on getting more than 5 total, really, because I'm not looking to sell honey. Just have the hive solely for teaching purposes, but I might go to 10. Never know. It's hard to stop once they see how they do over the winter. But long term, 5 to 10 would be my goal max. Jean says, after feeding in August, should we test, then treat for varroa? Well, it really depends on when your cold weather comes in. But here in Pennsylvania, we treat in July, and then we can feed when necessary. My bees were quite hungry right before I treated, the end of June and July. But now the weight is going up according to the one hive scale I have. And they seem quite busy, actually, especially the one hive that I never split. One hive swarmed, one hive split, and one hive just as stayed put. And they're very active and appear to be going somewhere. Andrew says, can a beehive get mean while experiencing a robbing? Yes, beehives will have very aggressive behavior and be very agitated when they're going through robbing. Charlie says, I never had hive beetles in Northeast Pennsylvania. Yeah, I've seen a handful of small hive beetles in my hives this year. The population will go up and up for us because it goes down to almost nothing over wintertime. And that was the problem in Hawaii, is that small hive beetle population. That's the benefit that honeybees have, is that their population goes down, but they do a really good job overwintering and bringing back their population even when it's still cold out there, producing their heat. I do not know what small hive beetles do in the wintertime so that they don't die. But their population goes down a lot, and they don't bounce back until the honeybees bounce back. And though they can feed off of fruit and stuff, they don't need honeybees the way varroa mites do. But small hive beetles like varroa mites, their population increases slowly and is very high come now when the honeybee population is starting to go down. And so that's the real issue that honeybees face, is that their population is now decreasing. They're consolidating, and they're getting ready for winter. And now they're starting to get weaker and more susceptible to robbing and pests and everything. And they have all this honey in their hive. And you have the mites and the small hive beetles. Their population is just increasing. So that's a real tricky part when it comes to keeping your hive safe from robbing. So I'm not sure how bad the population will get here over the next couple of months, but it is pretty low right now. Uh, and hopefully it will stay that way. It's really a huge issue in the southern states and areas that have a more moderate winter. But that also might be a reason why I didn't have as much robbing in Hawaii. With small hive beetles, I really kept the amount of excess honey to a minimum, and I stored a lot in chest freezers and would give it back to the bees. I didn't harvest everything, but I knew how much the bees needed to get them through winter. Even though it's not a cold winter, there's very little blooming in the wintertime. And so you have to leave them enough food to sustain them through the winter. But I didn't harvest all of the excess. I harvested most of it, but I still left some in the freezer to feed them over the course of winter, as opposed to just leaving it all on the hive. That's really not a good way to go in the warmer states. It's the benefit of being able to open the hive in the wintertime, is that you can feed them a frame of honey. You don't have to just throw sugar on top under the lid. And so not having an excess of resources and really consolidating those hives, even taking out frames of drawn out comb that have nothing in the cells, um, I take those out as well. If a box is not full of bees, if the frames aren't covered in bees, then they can be taken away. And keeping the hive mite levels low so that the bees are strong and healthy. And I didn't have bottom boards. I just had 3/4 inch holes in my boxes most of the time, and so having that small entrance, there was no having to reduce entrances because the entrance was already so small. It was very easy for them to guard a small entrance like that. And I was always moving my bees, which was the hardest part for me, was finding a location for my bees where there was an abundance of food. Since I was selling honey, I needed my hives to gather honey, or else there was no point to me having 25 beehives that I was running. I could just have a handful and it could be a hobby, but if it was going to be a business and I was going to sell it, then I needed all of my hives to bring in as much food as possible. And so I was constantly moving my bees to locations that had an abundance of food for them. And that's the real key to robbing. Bees aren't going to rob when there's food available. So that's just a process for me now, is hopefully I can keep my bees at my home, and I just have to continue to plant more and more. There was like 3 bees in just one flower this morning on my squash, and they're all over the borage, and I got some goldenrod and plan to throw seed bombs along the road, and hopefully the deer won't eat too much of the goldenrod, but at least they do not like to eat the borage, thankfully, so far. um One question: can drones get kicked out? Look like robbing. Drones can go to any hive they choose. They are not considered robbing because they don't rob. They feed themselves and that's it. They never gather honey for the sake of bringing it to the hive. They just gather honey for themselves. There will be a point that they'll kick them out and they will die, but until that point, they are, free to roam the hives and don't really have an allegiance to any one hive in particular. Thomas Long says, I installed robbing screens in the hope that they prevent robbing. Um, be careful with that. I'm not sure what kind of robbing screens you're referring to, but there's like one robbing screen that's literally just uh, an entrance. So let me first talk about what to do when your hive is being robbed. So the big thing is that if you think your hive is being robbed, you want to reduce the entrance so that it's really easy for the bees to defend. An entrance reducer is an easy way to do it. There's the medium-sized entrance and the very small entrance. You want to use the small entrance so that it's really just like this tiny little 1-inch gap that the bees have to defend. If there are other holes in your equipment, like cracks in the corners of your boxes or other gaps, you might want to block them off. You can use duct tape as an easy temporary thing. But the thing is that there's just two things you want to keep in mind. And one is that if you have like formic acid or Apogard or one of those treatments that you need to have the hive open for, do not close off your hive. I do not think a hive would get heavily robbed when you have these treatments in the hive. I think the scent would deter them enough, but if for whatever reason it's happening, don't block it off. Now, if it is really hot out, it's also really tricky because you want them to be able to cool down the hive, or else their brood will get too hot and it will die. And so that is no better than their honey being stolen from them. So if it is hot out, you can reduce the entrance, but you also can just take hardware cloth, a screen, something with holes for ventilation, and block off most of the entrance and leave a gap. And so you're still at least allowing airflow, but you're making the entrance that the bees have to man a lot smaller. If you have any kind of feed in the hive, take it out. If there's at least one frame of honey for every 4 frames of brood, your bees will be fine. They won't be starving. So just do not feed them because the feed can really attract bees. And if you really insist on feeding them, don't add the honeybee healthy amino boost and things of that sort to it because that has a really strong smell. And do not at all use entrance feeders. I don't like to use them ever because it really just, bees can smell that so much more easily at the entrance, and it's a lot easier to grab as a robber than having to go through the hive. But definitely at times when there's not a lot of food for the bees to gather, you really don't want to be feeding them inside the hive like that. Now, if you think there's robbing going on, but you're not seeing like heavy activity at the entrance and that higher pitched loud buzzing sound, you're just seeing like maybe a couple of bees rolling around trying to sting each other, and it's hot out, do not reduce the entrance. Bees go through these periods of robbing off and on throughout the year. It happens, and it's a part of bees' way of life. So don't overreact to this and cause more harm than good and make it difficult for them to cool the hive down and ventilate it. Now you can, if you're seeing heavy robbing, you can take a sheet or a towel and wet it. People usually say to use white. I'm not sure if there's really a good reason for it, but you wet it and you put it over the hive. Now you want to drape it so it goes over the front. The reason for this is that it really like kind of masks the scent coming from the hive. So when A bee finds this hive and is like, oh, great, there's tons of honey in this hive. It's easy to get in and out, hardly any guard bees. They grab some honey, they leave, they go back to their hive, and they show a whole bunch of other bees in the hive how to find this hive. Now, these other bees saw a bee dance, and now they have to figure out how to get the honey. So they're going to follow the bees' directions to this hive, but from there, they still have to figure out how on earth to get into the hive. Where is this food? What does it look like? How am I going to get in? So when you have a sheet over it or a towel, they're not going to be using all of those odorant receptors that they have to figure out how to get into the hive. Also, any bees that had already been to the hive are going to come back to get more, and they're now just going to have a hard time figuring out how to get back in. The bees from the hive, the foragers from that hive, are also going to be in the same boat, and they're going to be having to figure out how to get back in too. But in the end, it's better if you just keep everybody out. Even if it means some of the foragers from that hive are also going to have difficulty getting back in for the time being. Now, there's a really great video Frederick Dunn has on his channel. If you just go to his channel and put in the search bar robbing, it comes up, and he shows a hive that is being very heavily robbed, and he has a Bee Smart. It's by Bee Smart, and it's a screen, and it really looks like a mouse guard, but the other side of the mouse guard that just has those entrance holes. And so if your hive is being heavily robbed, that's another thing you can do, is instead of the sheet or towel, like, I mean, this is like crazy intense, just like 20 bees at any given time, just like shooting into this hive, trying to get in and out. You can put either that part of the mouse guard or the screen on top. Now, this just allows air to get into the hive, but doesn't allow anybody to get in or out. And what you want to do is just move it aside, pull it up every couple of minutes to let any bees that are stuck in the hive to get out. But you don't want to let any new bees back into the hive, and then you close it back up. And you want to keep doing this every few minutes until those robber bees stop trying to get into the hive and things close down. With the Bee Smart screen, it looks just like that underside to the mouse guard, but it has this little slit on top, so you can open it up and the guard bees can get out without letting any other bees in. And this isn't going to be on the hive for like a full day or even half a day. This is just like an hour or two. You would want this on the hive just temporarily to keep the ambush from the other bees, to stop that. And then you would want to open up the entrance again. Now, you can combine weak colonies together, or you can take a weak colony and combine it with a stronger colony. You can wait. I would wait until, you know, like the really heavy robbing is done. Maybe do it later in the evening when there's not so many bees at the hive. And you just want to make sure that the bees that are being robbed were weak or small, just because of something like they swarmed or something happened to their queen. If you don't know why they never really amounted to much and grew much that year, you don't want to merge them with a healthy hive, because you could be spreading nosema, tracheal mites, things of that sort to a strong hive. And we don't want to do more harm than good when working with our bees. You also do not want to open the hive when you think that there's a lot of robbing going on. Usually the beekeeper wants to open the hive in the middle of the day when most of the foragers are out. But if you are concerned that robbing is happening to this hive, but for some reason you really need to get in, one, either just like put it off for a little bit, unless it's really absolutely necessary, or keep the inspection really short and do it earlier in the day or later in the evening when there's not so much activity. Because when the hive is open, all of those smells from inside the beehive are even more available. When I have inspected a hive numerous times, I have had a wasp just like fly right onto the frame that I'm holding in my hands. And or it's like crawled right into the beehive. And sometimes a bee will just like jump right on top of it. And sometimes it just goes moseying around like belongs there. And I never really know whatever happened to that wasp. But it really just like makes it all of the smells just so much easier for all the other pollinators in the area to pick up on. Um, So that's what to do when your hive is being robbed, like in that moment. But again, don't overreact with the robbing. Just because you see some bees rolling around trying to sting each other or they're a little bit cranky, you don't want to go overboard and do more harm than good. You want to really sit by the hive and make sure that you are seeing a lot of this behavior, a really high amount of activity, and that very agitated, louder buzzing coming from the bees, not just uh, you maybe think a little bit of robbing is going on. So for the future, I'm sure you guys know a lot of these things, but yellow jackets are it's really common for them to rob honeybee colonies. So if you know of any nests on your property, you may want to get rid of them before they become a problem for your bees. You do not want to leave any beeswax, propolis, honey outside the hive on the ground. It's good to have some kind of container with you that you can put these things in while inspecting a hive. You don't want to leave used beekeeping equipment near your bees. Put it in a shed or a garage. Keep it away from your hives. Even if it doesn't seem like it seems empty, it still can have the residue of the beeswax and smell like bees and can still be something that other pollinators are going to pick up on when they fly by. And so when you inspect a hive, every inspection throughout the year, do not have your hive open long. Set a timer for 15 minutes, and once it goes off, that's when you should be wrapping things up. If you want to take it one step further, have a quiet box. That is an empty super, an empty brood box, Tupperware bin that you can put your frames in. And it's also best to have a cover, a piece of fabric, something on top. So when you are checking your hive, instead of putting that frame that was in your hive on the ground, leaning against the beehive, put it in a quiet box. This is especially good with brood and with aggressive hives. You put the frames in that box instead of leaving it out, and is even a slimmer chance that any bee or wasp flying by is going to pick up on all these smells from the beehive that you have open. And then, of course, then there's honey harvesting. So we try to be so careful, but then we have this crazy stressful day when we are pulling honey from our beehives and there's bees everywhere and it's sticky, and that's now probably getting to this part where the time of year when bees are going to be looking to rob, and now you have all this honey sitting out. So during honey harvesting, you want to make sure you have containers that close that you can put your frames in. So when you are opening your hive, you can pull a frame out, say, this is a frame that's ready to be harvested, brush the bees off, and put them immediately in a container that you can close up. Some people like to put something on the hive to get all the bees out of the entire super. If you have an entire super you can harvest, you can do that as well. Just open it up, check to see what you're pulling and what you're not pulling, and put it somewhere, close it up, Put a super inside a contractor's trash bag. Just make sure it's not a scented kind. Close it up so that it is not out in the open while you're doing this to your other beehives. Um, and uh, this is something that I have done in the past as well. When you're closing up your hives, make sure that all the boxes are straight on top of each other, that the lid is on top. It's easy for boxes to slide off a little bit and there to be a little bit of a gap that bees, robber bees, can get into. Do not be very careful when it comes to feeding as well. You can feed in the early spring when you first get your bees, or when it's starting to warm up if your bees are lacking in food in the hive. But you do not want to just continue to feed every single time you think there's just not a lot of flowers blooming. You can start feeding them again come the late summer once you've taken your treatment out, before you treat again when you close your hive up. But you just want to be very careful with your feeding. When you have syrup in the hive, especially if you're adding like an amino boost to it, it has a very strong scent to it. It can really encourage robbing. So make sure that the feed is inside the hive, not at the entrance, and keep an eye on it. I think for this time of year, probably the safest way to feed your bees is with the jars. You put, you just get canning jars. I like to take the nail that the small nails I use to build frames for my hives, and I poke 5 or so holes in the lid using a hammer. And then I fill up those jars with syrup, close it up, and turn it upside down into the beehive. And so that has a lot less chance of attracting robbers than having this giant feeder that's a big open box with just your lid on top. So that is what I have to say about robbing. And if you're having a hive or have a hive that did get robbed excessively, you really want to also just try to learn from it once everything is said and done. Was this a hive that was weak all summer long and you don't know why? Should you have tried to find out why? Should you have tried to send your bees into a bee lab so that it could be tested for nosema? Should you have treated for varroa mites sooner and you probably had a lot of deformed wing virus? Did you see bees with K-wing, which is a sign of tracheal mites? Was your hive just have a really low population, or should you have harvested honey sooner and you're really just dragging your feet? Like what can we learn from this, and what can we do to better help our bees in the future? Okay. Charlie says, NPA right now, we have goldenrod growing like crazy. I see goldenrod, I think it's goldenrod growing like crazy. I stole some from a park. I, like a public park. I planted it in my garden. It's not flowering though. We were just in Maine. We went to Maine last week, which is why I pushed back the chat till this week. And it was flowering like crazy. We're just driving in the car, and I'm like, the goldenrod's flowering. My husband seeing like a whole nother side to me he didn't see in Hawaii. I'm like a kid in a candy store right now. I'm like so excited about all the flowers and bugs and seeds everywhere. I was just like, it's so much fun. So yeah, I'm seeing goldenrod too, but I'm not seeing a flower yet. But it was flowering everywhere in Maine. It almost made me want to keep bees in Maine just for all the flowers we were seeing on the highway, the side of the road. It was just everywhere. I feel like it must make up for the fact that the season is shorter. They must bring in so much food in a couple of months. Um, Peaches says, "Is it too late to treat on the east coast of Florida?" It's never too late to treat. It's always uh, and if we're treating in July, then for Florida, you probably have some time. You want to treat when your nectar flow is ended, and one more time before you close your hive up for winter. I don't know if you will have to do that. In Hawaii, I only treated once, and that was right before my nectar flow started. I treated in December. So if you don't have any kind of frost, then you might only have to treat once in December. Really, the people that are treating twice in the late summer and then in the fall are the people that have a cold winter that need their winter bees to be really healthy so they can cluster up when it is freezing temperatures. If you're not having freezing temperatures, you don't have to worry so much. Like I was talking to somebody in Australia, and they said that they were told it was like you treat if your varroa mite levels are like, I think he said 8 or 12 or something or higher. And I'm not positive. I don't really know how cold it gets anywhere in Australia. But if you are in an area where your temperatures are never freezing cold, you don't have to worry about treating during special times of year like you do in the cold weather states. The cold weather states have more restrictions because you cannot really treat when it's freezing cold out, when there's snow outside. That's not when you want to treat, and you really want your winter bees to be healthy. There's the queen's laying eggs for bees that are just different. They have higher fat deposits. They live like months as opposed to your bees that are living like 6 weeks, 8 weeks. These bees are living like 4 months, 6 months, and they need to be strong and healthy and have like a lot of fat on their body. And so these bees need to be like incredibly healthy. We want like no varroa mites in the hive at this time. And since there are no drones in the hive, really, like there might be some, but there's really no drone pupa during this time. Is It's really the tail end of like queens looking to mate. So a lot more of the mites are going to be going into the cells with the worker bees. And we want those worker bees to be healthy. You guys in the warmer climates probably still have queen breeding going on and drones everywhere. And so most of your varroa mites are hanging out on the drones, and you don't have as much to worry about. So for you, Peaches, you want to treat once really like your big bloom has ended. And if you're in Florida, I would say it's probably going to be similar to my experience in Hawaii with the Brazilian pepper tree. And you probably have a July or early August bloom. And if that's the case, then you don't want to treat until after that ends. But I'm not positive about that. You should really just check your area and make sure you see what's blooming that time of year. My goodness, it got so humid all of a sudden. David says, I put extracted frames back on colonies to clean up. Hives only have reduced bottom entrance. It seemed to encourage robbing. Yeah, the extracted frames, we usually call them wet frames because they're like wet from the honey being pulled from them. And if you put them back on the hive, but they don't need them, then you really want to take them off after like a day or so, maybe a few days, but don't leave them on for like a week plus, because that can really just be excess that that can cause more harm than good. And opening the hive and those wet frames probably had a really strong smell to them. You bring them out to the bee yard, that could have really just sent off all kinds of alarms. You do that in the middle of the day, early afternoon, when the bees are all over, just tons, thousands of them are out just searching for food. And then here you come carrying all these frames covered in honey out in the open. And it's, the first thing that comes to mind is like, making a fresh batch of cookies and carrying them through the house. And it's like, I'm going to get every single person in the house coming down the stairs asking me what I'm up to, because everyone can now smell it and everybody's home and everybody's got nothing else better to do than to see where that smell is coming from. Terry says, does planting nectar-bearing flowers near a hive encourage robbing in the hive? I don't believe so, but I don't usually plant flowers close to my bees. Plant them a little bit of a distance. One of my students had said, I mentioned that I didn't see bees on any of the flowers that I had planted in the front yard. And he said that he had read that bees at first tend to go a little bit further from their hive and then go in closer and closer as the season goes on. And it was odd. That was exactly what I had seen with my hives. Was I never seen them on any of the flowers I had planted. And then slowly I started to see them on the borage and some of the other stuff. But I also have, it's been a little bit of a learning curve planting for bees. I planted a ton of marigold because I had read that bees like marigold, and a friend of mine sent me marigold seeds, but it turns out that they're like these giant marigold plants that are taller than my son, who is 6, and he's comes up to almost my armpit. These marigolds are like gigantic, and all I see are carpenter bees, bumblebees, bees, and this orange moth. I see bees on them occasionally, but they don't quite look like, I can't tell if they're actually getting to the nectar or not. So supposedly bees don't always like to go to the flowers and like right next to the hive. But if that's the only place you have to put them, or put them wherever you can. But I don't think having them right next to the hive is ideal, though I doubt it would encourage robbing. Like really, where we cause a lot of problems for the bees. Bees do not want to be so low to the ground, and they don't want to be right next to each other. And I don't really like having hives. Like I used to have my hives on pallets, 4 to a pallet, which is what the place I worked for did. And I, like I once had a hive that was requeening itself, and I was checking another hive when I saw the queen land on the bottom board of the hive next to it and get stung to death. And she had gone to the wrong beehive. She had just gone to the hive next to it. The poor thing, she was close, but she made a mistake and went to the wrong hive, and they just stung her to death and left her there on the landing board. So there's a few reasons why you don't want bees so close together. I don't like to have them like on a big long strip like that. And having bees so close together also encourages robbing. They want to be secret. It shouldn't be so easy for bees to find these other hives. It should be like hard work for them to be able to find another hive to rob it. And when you have all these bees so close together, the smell that comes from them on a warm day is going to be that much stronger and that much easier for them to be able to rob each other. But, I'm not about to go putting my bees in 4 different spots on my property, but I try not to have them inches apart. Calm Forward Straight says, I mean, when the drones are getting kicked out, can that look like robbing? Well, you can still tell the difference between a dead drone and a dead worker bee because the eyes are really that telltale difference. But I don't, and even if you see bees stinging drones and stuff, I mean, it's really obvious when they're doing this to a drone because they're so much larger. The drones are so much larger than worker bees. So I don't really think it looks like robbing much. And I doubt that it makes that frantic, higher pitched robbing, buzzing sound. Um, or I've never noticed it, even though they do kick the drones out of the hive sometimes in Hawaii. Jeff says, I got two nukes this spring and I'm new to this. Started feeding again and I've gone through 70 pounds of sugar, 1-to-1 syrup in 10 to 14 days. Is this normal? Well, it depends on how many hives you're feeding, but if this is like 4 or fewer hives, then no, this is not normal. Um, it really, I mean, what makes you think that you need to feed your bees? A lot of beginner beekeepers are very quick to feed their bees, but you really shouldn't have to this time of year unless like you really think they're starving. I mean, some people start to feed now, or if there's really just like not enough for them to get through winter. Um, but it's really not good for bees to be eating that syrup. So uh, it's really up to each individual person to decide what they want to do for their bees. But I don't like to feed my bees so much. And 70 pounds is a lot. I bought, 30 pounds of sugar um, about a month ago, and I made a gallon of syrup, which is still sitting in my refrigerator. I stopped feeding to give them a treatment, and now the hive's weight is going up, so I stopped, and then probably start feeding them in a little bit. But I I wouldn't think that if you had like 4 or fewer hives, you shouldn't be going through more than 30 pounds of syrup over the course of like a month or so. But it also kind of depends on the feeder you have. That's another reason why those canning jars actually seem to really work well. They just, the air doesn't evaporate from them. You don't have to worry about ants getting inside it, bees drowning in it. It just has these little holes for the bees to be able to put their proboscis up into and drink from. And it seems like a lot less is wasted. Ravina says a lot of palm trees blooming now in Florida. Bees are busy. I do remember the bees loving the palm trees in Hawaii. They were always, um, see a little fly crawling around behind me. The palm trees would always be buzzing in our yard. Terry says, I asked because I'm only on 2 acres and thinking about planting flowers for my bees. Yeah, I would say that, we have just an acre here, and I would go a little bit further away if you can before you start planting right near the beehives. You want to really keep the area right in front of the hives clear so that you can keep an eye on dead bees, bees that appear poisoned, and things like that. And then, of course, the sides of the hive is where you stand. So you want to be like walking around flowers, trying not to trample them, not putting your hive boxes on them, and all that stuff. So I like to keep the immediate area around my beehives clear for a bunch of reasons. Um, but that's just all I've been told. Was I don't know how much validity there is that the bees prefer to go a little bit further from the hive at first, but seemed like that's what they were doing. I'm sure that if they need food, they will gather food right next to the hive or down the street. They do what they need to do so that they aren't starving. Patrick says, is it too late to put a super on with goldenrod blooming in Minnesota? It's It's not too late. It just is like if they need it. If they have no space to put honey, then definitely put a super on and see what they do with it. The thing you want to be careful about is there's really two things when adding supers when you're not sure if they need it. One is there's nothing wrong with putting the super on. It's the frames and what's in the frames. If you're going to take like frames of drawn out comb and put them in there for the bees to refill, you want to be careful because if there's like say small hive beetles or robbing, you want to make sure you don't have like wax moth. You don't want like a small population of bees and all of this comb covered in honey that can attract attention from people wanting to take it and not enough bees to man it. So you could put like a few frames of drawn out comb in there. But if you're concerned that there's not enough population, don't put a whole box of drawn out comb on your hive for the goldenrod. Start with just a little bit and add more later on. And then, of course, if it starts to get colder out, warm air rises, and it's going to be more work for the bees to keep the hive warm if it's starting to go below 60 degrees Fahrenheit out. So just keep that in mind when adding boxes onto the hive. You might want to, if there's space in the frames and the brood boxes, then maybe not add that box on. But if it's still warm out, then it's not something you need to worry about. Junebug says, I saw a few teeny honeybees after removing some comb. They were gentle but seemed unusual in size. Have no idea. Sometimes, cell sizes can vary or they get full of propolis, and the bees that hatch out of them will be smaller. And the smaller cell sizes, that might have been what you were seeing. Woman in the Well says, I'm a new beekeeper this year in Northeast PA. Do I take the honey super off for the winter as long as there's enough capped honey on the 2 brood boxes below? Well, I mean, it's a little bit more to it than that when preparing the hive for winter. And that'll be like another talk I'll get into a little bit later in the year. But you do want to make sure that they have enough food, and then you don't have to add honey supers on the hive just because if there's enough food in your 2 deep brood boxes, then yes, that's all you do, and you take off the honey super. You don't want just like an empty honey super on the hive. But if you do have the excess honey that you want to give them, there is nothing wrong with having that extra honey super on the hive if it's actually full of honey. But most people do not have that on the hive. If you're running medium boxes, then you might have 3 medium boxes for your brood and honey. And if you are running deep boxes, like 10 frame deep boxes, then that 3rd box is unnecessary, and you can just have 2 10 frame deep boxes stacked up on top of each other, and that's sufficient. And the honey supers get stored elsewhere, and the excess honey can be harvested, or you can store it for next year for the bees. All right, it's almost 9:15. Thank you to everybody who joined in the live chat. It's nice to see all of you, and I will see you next Friday. And for those of you in my class, I will be doing another live chat next week. Take care, everybody. See you next time.